Right, hey everybody, welcome to another episode of 500 Blockcrunch, a mini series on all things crypto scaling, presented by the Blockcrunch podcast and 500 Startups. I'm your host, Jason Choi. Now, we've talked a lot about scalability projects on the show, including alternative consensus protocols like Solana's proof of history, as well as generalized and virtual state channels like Connext and Seller. And today we're focusing on a really exciting technique called sharding. And one project that is using sharding as an approach to scaling is Quarkchain. So I'm really excited to have T. Zhao, the founder and CEO of Quarkchain, here to talk to us more about it. And previously, he was a software engineer at Facebook. He also spent some time at Dell and Google, and also holds a PhD in electrical and computer engineering from the Georgia Institute of Technology, as well as a bachelor's degree in computer science from Jiao Tong University from Shanghai. So very excited to pick Chi's brain on the concept of sharding as well as what he's working on with Quarkchain.
This is a worldwide phenomenon.
So just to get us started, can you tell us about, just on a high level, what is Quarkchain?
So Quarkchain aims to address the blockchain scalability problem by incorporating, we call horizontal scalability technologies, where the key technology here is called sharding. And then we are a group of engineers from Facebook and Google who were used to work on their large-scale distributed systems, high-performance systems, which use sharding technology extensively to address the scalability problem in Google and Facebook, that in order to provide like internet-wide users services.
And how did you decide to go with sharding? Because I know there are a lot of different ways to build scalable blockchains.
Yeah, because we used to work on sharding technology frequently. Actually, personally, I touched like a different sharding projects in Facebook and Google, and also Dell, maybe 10 different projects. And also, this is also the key technologies in Google and Facebook to address their problems. And when it comes to the blockchain, my first is that, hey, how can we use the existing like mature solutions to address this problem in a very like a fast way?
Mm-hmm. And just to talk about the overarching vision for Quarkchain, how many transactions per second are you aiming to achieve? And how does your approach differ from, say, other sharding projects?
So we aim to achieve more than 100,000 transactions per second. So this is our like a short and midterm goal. And right now, our testnet, which was launched on July the 7th, is able to deliver more than 14,000 transactions per second. And so we are going to have a TPS competition. So we will ask our developer communities to help reproduce our numbers.
And compared to other sharding technologies, does your team pay attention to, what the transaction per second is for these other projects? And do you try to compete with them, or do you guys mostly focus on building the best Quarkchain for now?
We know some sharding technologies, they are able to deliver probably a couple of thousands transactions per second according to their report. And then we also see some projects that claim to do more than 14,000 or even tens of thousands transactions more. But we haven't seen the actual testnet environment that we can, for example, reproduce or verify. So I think this is still very open area here.
And from a user perspective, if I pay someone on Quarkchain, how long does it usually take for my transaction to be confirmed in the shard and on the root chain? And how would this compare to, say, how fast I would be able to do it on the Bitcoin blockchain?
So actually, I think there is the two terms here. One is called latency, another is called throughput. So basically, latency is that suppose a user submit a transactions and how fast the system can respond. And another is regarding throughput is that how many users at the same time can submit the transactions and then the system can still respond properly. So actually, our solution is more focused on the throughput so that a lot of users can still submit transactions, so that the network is likely to be congested. However, latency actually no any like a distributed system or horizontal scalability solutions is able to improve that. So from that many which means that when the user submit the transactions, we should be a little bit faster than Bitcoin because we're using some similar concept from Ethereum, so they can confirm the transaction faster. And for example, probably for sure we right now is all try to optimize it in several tens of seconds, and the root chain we try to optimize it with a few minutes. However, from this latency wise perspective, like compared to Ethereum right now, we are still not saying hey we are making significant improvement in that perspective, but we are able to, for example, deliver allow more users, like for example, much more users to concurrently use our network simultaneously and still able to offer our service like blockchain services in a very properly timing manner.
I see. And thanks for the clarification about throughput and latency, because I think that's a very important distinction to make as well. And focusing on more the sharding technology itself, as I mentioned before, I spoke to another project on the show called Solana. And during that interview, they brought up how in some cases, sharding may also shard the security of the network. So I'm curious, if, say, a hacker wants to attack a shard on the Quarkchain blockchain, how much of the network do they have to control, and how would you work around that? How would you prevent that?
In our case, for example, to perform a double spending attack, we have a consensus we call boson consensus, which we just published more details. And one key property of this boson consensus is that as long as the transaction that is being confirmed by the root chain, then it will be protected by the root chain's security. Where the root chain, we are expected to allocate more than 50% of hash powers there, and which means that any double spending attack that will needs like a 25, at least 25% of hash power of the network. So I think versus like Bitcoin, Ethereum, that is like, for example, they have this 51% percentage, like a double spending attack that is lower. However, like we believe like these days, the percentage of hash power is less meaningless compared to the number of hash power that is the actual cost to perform a double spending attack here. And I can give more realistic examples if you're also interested in.
Yeah.
Yeah. So for example, let's take Ethereum and Ethereum Classic example. So right now, Ethereum has roughly 200 terahash per second hash power, while Ethereum Classic, which has roughly 14 terahash per second. So which means that Ethereum Classic has less than 10% of the hash power of the Ethereum. So which means that any hash power, because they use the same hash algorithms, any, like for example, maybe 7% of the hash power from the Ethereum is able to perform a double spending attack on Ethereum Classic. However, like Ethereum Classic is still, I think, is still listed in most exchanges, even like Coinbase, and people haven't found any attack, to my best knowledge, maybe because even to perform this 7% of the hash double spending attack, it still seems to be require a significant amount of hash power that is more than probably around 10 terahash per second. That is a significant cost. And so even with this 7%, I think it's somewhat still rich on some kind of security. But right now, we are offer even more, like 25%. Imagine combining Ethereum and Ethereum Classic, we have 25% of hash power to perform a double spending attack. That's even more than, let me see, 50 terahash. So let's take a Ethereum and Ethereum Classic example. That is even much more stronger than current Ethereum Classic itself.
Mm-hmm. And is that 25% supposed to change or adjust in the future, or is that pretty much a fixed percentage?
Actually, it is adjustable. There are several parameters in our consensus. One key parameter is basically called tax, which is the percentage of the block rewards that are collected by the root chain. And the more reward that is collected by the root chain, and according to economy equivalents, then there will be more hash power allocated on the root chain. And the second solution is that we can employ some new consensus on the shard so that the consensus doesn't need to run like proof of work. And for example, one direction we are investigating is to employ proof of stake as the consensus of each shard. And then so that there are more hash power that can be allocated back to the root chain. And so that the percentage can be increased even more.
And that's definitely more similar to Ethereum's approach, which we will talk about later as well. But one more thing about sharding that's really interesting is cross-shard communication. So for our listeners, this could mean a scenario in which one sender is in one shard and the receiver is in another. And this is a pretty big challenge for a lot of people working on sharding. So how will Quarkchain go around this?
Yeah. So first, to ensure, we actually borrow a lot of concept from operating system to because operating system they also like cross CPU core across processing costs, and we see a lot of similarities there. And so we first simplify this cross-shard transaction to only allow moving balance from one shard to another shard, as you mentioned, like sender first send a transaction and then receiver receive transactions. And there are more complicated cases, for example, calling different contracts from one smart contract from one shard to another shard, where there are two this source and destination smart contract at different shards. This will be more complicated case, and we will haven't we does not address at the moment, but we probably address in the future. And then for this case, we have this we call boson consensus to help to speed up these processes. So the original ideas, also including Ethereum, is to introduce finality or almost instant finality. So the basic idea is to make sure that the standard transactions can be quickly finalized on one shard, so that another shard, when upon receiving the transactions, it guarantee that the transaction, the standard one, will not be reverted from the source shard, so to make sure the transaction is secure. I mean, in terms of double spending. In our case, we have called root chain first consensus, and we have this mechanism. Someone kind of employing the root chain as kind of as a clock, so that we have a requisite requirement that the sender of the clock must be smaller than the receiver clock, meaning the block. And this will guarantee that the order of the event that the receive transaction must always execute after the sender transactions, so that we can guarantee a double spending attack unless this clock being attacked. Like, for example, this means that the root chain being attacked, which I just mentioned before, which have 50% of hash power and at least 25% of double spending attack. Otherwise, we can guarantee the cross transaction first is secure. Second, that we can send as much as the cross transactions, which is also scalable, which means that as long as the more shards, the system can run more cross transactions.
And moving on to more of the social side, which is scaling the developer community, I know that's something that's very important to Quarkchain. And one thing that really stood out to me is that Quarkchain supports smart contracts on the Ethereum virtual machine, the EVM, which means developers can use Solidity, which to listeners is the native language for Ethereum. This makes it a lot easier for Ethereum developers to maybe port over their dApps to Quarkchain. But my question to you is, with Ethereum implementing sharding on their own and holding such a huge mindshare in developers right now, how would you guys approach scaling the developer community?
So we actually also actively discuss with our ideas with Ethereum. We have actually presented some of the ideas in the early this year to also Ethereum foundations, and also discuss some also closely watching their progress. So I mean, from that perspective, first because a lot of ideas are inspired by a lot of our working experience, and also a lot of system we have closely working before. So I think definitely they will come up with different solutions. So that I think that eventually there will probably different sharding solutions and dedicated for different kind of usage of blockchains. And second, like we are like the virtual machine, we use the Ethereum virtual machine mainly because this is probably the most mature and also widely adopted virtual machines with a lot of like developer support, for example, IDEs, like for example, Solidity and also IDEs. And so I think a lot of existing developer can quickly enjoy the benefit on top of us. Third, we are also welcome to any new virtual machine technologies. We are a very flexible platform, which means that we can support like new virtual machines and even new consensus and even new ledger or even new token economies by adding more shard into the system. So I think there's a lot of like flexibility that are already inherently designed in the system.
Got it. And I know Quarkchain also recently open sourced its code. So why open it now?
Also, we actually have been working on this code for last 8 months, and we have internally we want to present kind of like complete first version of the code so that everybody is able to, for example, run our testnet, be able to reproduce our numbers, and also have proper documents to understand what's going on there. So we've spent a significant amount of time first fix several bugs after we launch our first testnet. And second is to publish a series of technical articles to discuss more technical details of our sharding solutions, which has more details versus our white paper. So when we write our white papers, actually we like a lot of not details are not being disclosed, but we just write some key characters there. But now we present more. For example, yesterday we just present the details of how our consensus work, which I just mentioned, some general ideas there. So next is that we want to encourage more developers to be able to contribute to the code, especially for our next testnet, which is we plan to launch 1 month later. We want to encourage all the developers to be able to run their node and connect to our testnet together, and also even they can even mine on top of us. And so to be able to further to participate into the project and then to be able to contribute it.
So was the reason for not having the code open before because you guys were still developing the code, or were you guys deliberately trying to keep it kind of in a stealth mode before you launched to the developers?
So we want to first make sure that a lot of these issues like are fixed, so that we can have kind of the complete solutions before like we open source. Um, Otherwise, there will be a lot of like uncertainties with our code and major changes. I don't want to make these things like creating some chaos in the developer community. Uh, yeah, and also we want to publish some posts to educate, also how to explain more details, because we know even to us we believe this is technology that is easy to understand to us, but we still want to make sure that we can explain this carefully, because reading the code sometimes there are too much details. But I think it's better to have a big pictures before like we can show the details to see how these actually work. And otherwise, like just showing the code, I think sometimes is may not be the best practice. So there are a lot of considerations. But I think like we already received several stars and receptions, and definitely we will see more like feedbacks from our community and encourage people to work with us.
Absolutely. And now to focus on something that I'm really curious about, which is the tokenomics side. And I know just to start off, just to discuss the ICO a little bit, I know that there was a special system for basically selecting who can participate in the ICO, which I thought was really interesting. So can you describe what that system was and why it was designed in that way?
Yeah, so basically, when we are performing the ICO, we get a lot of popularities. So I believe we have more than 20,000 like people take part in the KYC and submit their documents, pass in the KYC. Actually, I personally reviewed a couple of hundreds of these their KYC documents. Yeah, because there's so much requests. However, since we have a relatively small bucket for the publics, so we allocated 4 millions for the public. So it will be very hard to like satisfy every, every people's needs. So we designed a scoring system to basically score based on the different factors. Especially one major factor is the technical understanding of our project from our white paper and also other sources. So we want to really to encourage, like to promote more awareness of sharding technologies in the blockchain as our like when the ICO process. So then we like basically run this procedure and then finally finalize like a 5,000 like candidates. However, through this procedure, every candidate has score and also has lottery. I really appreciate, and also we actually have some program actually performed before, using their score as, for example, the testnet tokens, so that the people who have score doesn't need to, for example, ask for like additional test tokens. They can use their test like a KYC, like a whitelist score as the testnet tokens. They can easily directly access our testnet.
And I think that's such an interesting approach because you are weeding away the speculators who just want to flip ICOs, and you're essentially forcing the people who actually want to invest and participate in Quarkchain to learn about the technology, to become long-term believers in the technology, which I think is such an interesting and smart approach to it. But diving deeper into the kind of coin supply side, I remember there was this notice on Binance about how only a tiny amount, I think less than 4% of the total supply of Quarkchain's tokens were first listed on the exchange. So I'm curious, why list so little of the supply at first?
Oh, actually, so I think there's a lot of like so I mean unplanned events, like for example being listed in Binance. Actually, like Binance, we go through standard procedures, but we did not expect this processing speed is so fast. So that at the beginning, we doesn't expect because Binance has a large volume, but it we when we design this and we publish this when in the public sale, we did not expect that. So that creates a lot of like if people say, hey, this is a supply issue. But at the beginning, like it was planned to list in like a smaller exchange, and then gradually like follow this schedule. And actually, this schedule is also determined months ago. I mean, when we have this public sale announcement, which is also written there. So I think I think feel in some like basically the blockchain is run so fast that sometimes there's always unexpected events happens, and so we have to face it.
Yeah, so thank you for clarifying that because I know that some people in the community was wondering why that was the case, and I think that was a very clear answer. So thank you for that. And diving deeper into the supply itself, I also read that Quarkchain is unlocking private sale tokens every month, essentially increasing the supply slowly. And of course, some really short-term investors are concerned that in the short term, this addition in supply will suppress the price. So can you explain, what was the rationale for this decision?
So actually, we have made this decision very very early, and so but later, like I think I've mentioned that a lot of it changes, so that like a lot of these probably like these original design ideas are not properly being executed, especially like this is far before like we listing exchange. We already announced this schedule plan like in publicly. So I think, but um, we know like probably our communities complain to us regarding this what we just said. Actually, we have um, like a listen to them, and so but still like this always this something changes much faster than the plan. So.
Yes, absolutely. And that's definitely a top of mind issue for some investors. At least when I was checking out the subreddit for Quarkchain, that seems to be a question that a lot of people were asking, and a lot of people want to understand what's the behind the scenes decision making process for Quarkchain. So thanks for sharing that. And I guess focusing on the kind of further term and future for Quarkchain, I know there are a lot of exciting developments. So what would you say are the next milestones that Quarkchain is hoping to achieve, and what is next on the roadmap?
So the major next is basically we plan to launch our testnet, next version of testnet at the end of this next month. So the main purpose is so that the testnet is almost close to what the mainnet could deliver, both in terms of mining, both in terms of the virtual machine, cross-shell transactions, most of the features. So we welcome everybody is able to join testnet, contribute to it, and even attack it to see if there's any vulnerabilities. So if everything is ready, so we are able to. We also plan to launch on another testnet that includes some new features, which we call Quarkchain 2.0, probably a few months later. But once all these things are ready, we want to launch our mainnet as soon as possible. And from historical lesson, we learned that even for Ethereum, they have a bunch of excellent developers. Their stabilization of their mainnet took roughly 9 months. So we are also expecting. Right now, we see that because these lessons we learn, we can be faster, but still probably the mainnet also may take us some time to stabilize. So I think there's some several months efforts to make all of it to be production ready.
And as you mentioned before, when you're running something that's open source and at the edge of technology, when you're building something like Quarkchain, in particular, it's hard to please every single person out there. So, what would you say are the biggest challenges that Quarkchain will have to overcome before the scheduled release of mainnet?
I think the main challenges here is we need to make sure the um, like security of the blockchain emblem security is not by design; it's rather the code security. So that in that perspective, first open source will greatly help people um, to examine the code. And also, we will invite the experts, both in terms of personal organizations, to perform code audit to double check if there's any issues. And because there's several well-known exploits that exist in the historical of the history of the blockchain. Like even Bitcoin has overflow issues that people can create a large amount of the bitcoins, and so I think we need to be extremely careful about all this. Make sure the system is in a well shape, and then the second is the technology changes in the blockchain is so fast, so that we are also very open to adopt any new technologies, which we basically designed to Quarkchain 2.0 to enable flexibility in that. So I think this is two major, from technical perspective, two major concerns from my perspective.
And I think a lot of people don't realize that for a lot of scaling projects like Quarkchain and other projects we had on the show, it's not just about scaling the blockchain, but it's also about balancing a decentralized block production and also security. So I really appreciate you emphasizing the point of its security. So just to close this off, I know that Quarkchain has also announced an eco fund. So could you tell us more about it?
Yeah, Ecofarm is basically fund that aims to sponsor the projects that build on top of the Quark chain. So the projects includes basically the applications, like for example, some are already developed on Ethereum, but they need more scale so they can use Quark chain. And we will encourage them to try and then to give us feedback to see how we can further improve it. And second is because the flexibility we are going to offer in our Quarkchain 2.0, that means that a lot of vertical domain blockchain are able to also employ our platform to develop their consensus or even virtual machine token economies as a kind of independent shard. But once they join the system, they can immediately be share the ecosystem with other shards together, and for example, enjoy the benefits of cross-shard transaction, etc. And so with this Ecofarm, we are able to support this project to help them to speed up their processes, the process to both in terms of funding, and also we are also going to offer some technical support and also other support from how to run like blockchain projects in crypto world, because I know a lot of traditional, for example, internet companies, they want to enter these areas, but still a lot of open uncertainties and open questions, and then we try to help them to circling a lot of pitfalls and also a lot of clarify these questions like from technical perspectives or other perspective, so that they're able to quickly employ our capabilities and deliver more values in the blockchain.
Well, G, thank you very much for sharing the behind-the-scenes progress of the Quarkchain project. It's been a pleasure speaking to you. And back to our listeners. Thanks for listening to another episode of the 500 Blockcrunch mini-series on scaling. Hopefully, you know more about scaling than before you listened to it, and hopefully you learned something about sharding in this episode as well. Personally, I'm pretty excited to keep an eye on what Quarkchain is doing. I really appreciate you for coming onto this show and being transparent about some of the concerns that the community might be having, and I'm excited to keep an eye on all of the scaling projects that we've interviewed. And if you haven't already, please do subscribe to this podcast and give us a 5-star rating, because it does help us get this out to as many people as possible. And I also intend on sharing more analysis, written analysis, on my Twitter. So if you haven't followed me already, you can find me and talk to me there at MrJasonChoi, Mr. Jason Choi. And I've been your host, Jason Choi. This has been the Blockcrunch podcast with 500 startups. And I look forward to seeing you soon.